And let's see if that's YEC. All right. Then next, I'm going to ask that people open up. Do people have access to the folder that has the experiment component worksheets in it? I sent that out. I've sent that out a couple of times. I'm going to drop the link to it right now. So I'm going to ask that people, at the very least, have your worksheet open in front of you as you talk it through with us. I just dropped the link to the folder that has each worksheet. And y'all know how 1, 2, 3, nod it goes? Say 1, 2, 3, nod it, and you put your finger on your nose. The last person to do it goes first. So 1, 2, 3, nod it.
All right.
I think, Nikki, I think you're the last one. So
I don't think so.
So Power, y'all go first. And then but the privilege of going first is you get to call on the next group. So all right, so I'll keep track of time. I'll let you know when you've got about 2 minutes when you need to start wrapping it up. So James, Nikki, whoever, take it away.
Yeah, I can do it. So let me pull this up. So at Power U, one of the kind of main things that we're trying to do, or the adjustments that we're making to the organization, is trying to have a leadership development model that has a reproducing logic, but is also structured to constant things that are going to happen every single year, so that organizers on staff and folks who are new members to the organization will have a concrete experience of going through, quote unquote, one full campaign. And this was based off of lessons that we've had in our previous organizing experience, and then just assessing the organizational model, is that we, like many other organizations, were working on a campaign to implement restorative justice for many years. And part of the process was there hasn't been a strong way for us to truly test what are the skills that people are learning. Can young people actually hold the campaign complexities, especially if it's a multi-year campaign? Young people leave, and then we have to bring on new people, and kind of bring them up to speed on what's been happening for the past 5 years. So what you have is this dynamic where the majority of the information, the majority of the relationships, and the organizing is actually paid staff and not necessarily young people or volunteers. So we wanted to see if we can try to change that, or kind of create some sort of process where at least some portion of the work is going to be on young people, volunteers who will be challenged, and with the logic that if we have a young person who has been in the organization for 4 years, can they essentially have the ability to say, I have the confidence because I've actually been through 4 campaigns, because the budget is something that happens every single year. I did not list the hypothesis fully, but I guess the two that I'll lay out and that I'll add later into this document is, the first one is, can using a schedule, structure, campaign timeline in the budget actually allow members to internalize that they have campaign experience that gives them the confidence to take on more skills? This is the first hypothesis. And the second hypothesis related to this around membership is, if we have a more structured, more rigorous membership process to be a member in Power U, will that change the overall character of the kind of young people that come into the organization, and increase their capacity to do actual organizing work, as opposed to come to the organization because it's part of a social club, or that, you know, they're there for many years, but haven't actually been a part of something that challenges them to do something that's more than just being in a meeting and saying, you know, things that they know that we might want them to say. So that's kind of what we're testing out. And what you see, I guess I'll move down to be quick. In terms of our leadership development model and in terms of our base building, they kind of fold into this logic. The only thing I'll add around the leadership development model, and you'll see later in our metrics, is that we hope that, you know, if we have a freshman who goes through the orientation process, who becomes a canvasser, who goes through a listening session, and then does campaign work to mobilize people for the annual budget, if they complete one full cycle of that, by the time they're a sophomore next year, can they do 10% of the work that paid staff did? And then if they do happen to stay, by the time they're a junior, can they do upwards to 25% of the work that paid organizers are doing in the process? And then, of course, when they're a senior or maybe exploring college, can they actually hold this position as if they were a part-time organizer that has the ability to do the work really well, that doesn't have to be trained, which would look like potentially 40% of a paid organizer's work. So that's kind of what we're testing more long-term beyond the date of this particular experiment. And then in terms of base building, yeah, the only specific thing is utilizing a concrete membership process where if you are a young person, you essentially have a window of time where you have to get involved in the organization in order to be a member and benefit from some of the member processes. And that happens in January. So we use the fall to recruit people, have social events, have conversations, have sessions in schools. And then we invite them to January orientation, where they'll go through a series of political education requirements. They'll do some canvassing, they'll do some skill building. And if they meet the basic requirement, then they'll become members. And then they get paid, they get stipends to become canvassers to do some of the door knocking. I'll move down to staff development and benchmarks. Similarly to young people, we're in the process internally of trying to develop a clear staff development process where if you're an organizer in the organization for 1 year, here are the skills that we hope that you set. 2 years in, here's what you expect, what you're expected to require. That hasn't been built out yet, but that's the same sort of logic behind it. And then as you see at the bottom of the benchmark, at the bottom, our timelines are just going to signal a repetitive cycle that happens every single year. So you'll see by September 5th, which is where we're currently at, we want at least 30% of the students who made it to complete the campaign cycle. September 5th is going to be the end of our first year of one full campaign in a couple weeks to recognize if we either won or lost. And then moving down the list, you'll see all we're doing is taking the lessons that we learned this year, making some maintenance, and then you'll see that we want to use like the snowflake model to then begin to scaffold up. So hopefully we have a doubling of the orientation session. The young people who've been through 1 year have concrete number requirements where they have to bring at least 3 members to the following orientation. And we hope that that sort of logic continues to accumulate, and you can see that reflected in the benchmarks. So I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, James. We have 5 minutes for clarifying questions. And before we do that, we had the 623 number. Who is that? Oh, never mind. They're gone. Okay. Any clarifying questions for Power U, Nikki and James, on the components of their experiments? I just dropped a link, Lucila, to the folder that has all the worksheets.
Thank you. I guess my question, so this is a 4-year experiment then, right?
Yeah, more or less.
I guess 4 years is best case scenario because we can actually test out the impact of freshmen all the way through their senior year.
Right. But there's information you'll be able to gather. I mean, that's part of the idea of having an annual cycle, right? So there's lessons that you're learning at the end of each year. That 623 number is back. Who is that?
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry. It's Isis with Puente.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Power U about their experiment? All right, that felt like a satisfactory pause. Power U, you all get to call on the next group.
We'll do Puente.
Right, and same thing, just I'll let you know when you got 2 minutes left.
All right, can you hear me? Okay, cool. Because last time it wasn't working. All right. So we have an amazing experiment that we are doing. We launched the pilot type thing in March, which was really good because now we can see a lot of the places that and gaps that we had back then. And as we start this new one in the fall, we are able to implement a lot of the stuff that we were lacking and be more intentional and have more of a clear pathway of where we want to go with the content that we were missing before. But basically our hypothesis is launching a youth pipeline program to recruit, train, and politicize young people to be engaged in our campaigns at Puente. So we have one youth-based or youth. We have immigration legal work that we do, and then we also have a criminal justice campaign work that we're starting. So there's a lot of different ways for youth to be plugged in. And one of the reasons of this experiment is because we wanted to build a stronger youth base that folks could include youth in their work and the other campaigns within the organization versus just having one youth focused campaign and then the youth get plugged in everywhere unintentionally or just like because there's base there or there's stuff there. So we wanted to be more intentional about how we have youth be plugged into and the ability for them to be plugged into all of the rest of the work that's happening in our organization. So a lot of it is building a large database of young people that are ready to take action, ready to organize, and can be plugged into campaigns at all levels, including and being more intentional about team leadership and guiding them through strategy, conversations, and things like that. So we want young people to basically, once folks go, we are having semester-based programming. So every fall and every spring, we'll have a group of youth, about 15 people who will come in and go through our program. And no more than that because we want to be intentional about their development. But by the end of the program, we want to be able to have them be able to either create teams in their schools or in their neighborhoods. Also, we want to be intentional about not excluding folks who are not students for one reason or another, but are also young people. So our leadership ladder looks like a program participant, a school, and then that program participant becomes a team lead that has team members that help with recruitment, and there's a new team lead per year. One of the questions I'm also thinking about is because we have the youth team leads at some point become part of a Puente Youth Leadership Committee. There? Sorry, it's frozen. Maybe it's my
Yeah.
internet. Okay, cool.
We lost you at the question about a leadership committee, a youth leadership committee.
Yeah. So let's say that there's a team at a school that has 3 really strong young leaders. How do we make space and acknowledge that leadership want and need when it comes to the youth leadership committee? So it's not just one rep from a school, or is it all 3 of them? I don't know yet. I don't know. I'm not there yet. But then this youth leadership committee would be sort of one, like the ones guiding more of like the strategy and things like that. And then thinking through the youth leadership committee, the team leads from the schools, training for trainers. How do we have skill development for school teams by their own peers, and not necessarily it's just always me or always someone from Puente staff training youth, but it's peer-to-peer training and communication and development that can begin to happen. And then campus specific campaigns correlated to a bigger campaign. So the vision that every campus or every group can have their own mini campaign within a school targeting whatever they want to do there, but with the commitment of a bigger campaign at Puente. They compare that they have in this. And then, yeah. Okay, I'm back. Where did I stop? Okay, and then the plan is that we.
Oh man. Isis, are you there? Can you? Max is getting back on.
Are you there?
Okay.
Okay, I'm switched to my hotspot. But yeah,
I think it's
semester, and that's the end, but the end for now.
Cool. Clarifying questions for Maxima?
Max, how did it go in the pilot that started in March? Like, what were like the big learnings or takeaways?
I think the big learning was just being more clear about the expectations towards the end of the program, or like you I think in the beginning, like having strong or directly asking for their commitment as they go through this process, and they're like towards the end of the program. And I think that was the biggest one. And then other ones is like, how do we are more clear or inclusive of organizing skills. And yeah, I think the organizing piece, because it was a lot of like political education, but not necessarily what are the skills you need to be an organizer that we need to be more intentional about. Yeah.
And have you thought about like what resources do you feel like you need to do that training with the young people? The hard skills, the concrete organizing skills training.
We have that. We just didn't think it was as big of a need as it is. So just being like, okay, this is like, yeah, I mean, getting more sense of like where folks are starting at and where we need to get them.
Mm-hmm.
But we have resources from about that, around those things. Yeah.
And you all were one of the groups that were going to pilot that leadership assessment that we developed with Research Hub. Were y'all actually able to test that out?
No, we haven't been able to.
Okay. We had about a little less than 3 minutes. If there are other questions for Puente about their experiment.
Yeah. Hey, Max. I have two questions. One, like, what does it mean? Like, what does it mean for somebody to be a lead? Like, how are they demonstrated that they want to be a lead? And then the other question is just a sense of like the scope or the scale, and then like just curious about why there's no north region, like just things I don't know about what's happening there.
I think maybe it got, so our experiment actually I think in the larger one goes up until 2021. So ours is also like a multi-year thing. There could be a north, and that will take us to 2021, and we'll do that. Yeah. And then we just split that like in those regions based on how our school district is, or like our main school district that we're targeting now. But also it could expand, right? Like 2 years from now, it could be like, oh, now we're hitting up a larger scale of land that we need to cover. And then for team lead, so far what we've been just thinking about is their ability to engage other people to the work. So like recruitment, or just being able to show up also. But also being intentional about developing there to be guiding them through the process of strategy, of like those tougher conversations, not tougher, but like more, it takes a longer time to guide young people through those conversations and for them to fully understand what's going on and what's happening. So being more
Yes. Okay. Hopefully Maxima will be able to come back online. I think you got half your question answered, James. Oh,
okay.
yeah, 20 seconds if you want to finish answering that question.
It's just harder it's just going to take a lot more time to work with them. That's it. I don't know.
Cool. Great. Do y'all want to call in the next group?
Next group.
Either Poder or Californians for Justice.
Does anyone want to go? Okay, Isabel. Yay.
Cool. So, so hypothesis for our experiment, and then I can provide some context. So our hypothesis is if we engage in intentional political education that coincides with electoral and policy opportunities, we will be able to mobilize the necessary mass to achieve our long-term goals toward liberation. So historically, Poder has engaged in electoral and policy work, but they were never integrated strategies, right? They were always very separate. And one of the conclusions that we kind of came to was that because they weren't integrated, because it wasn't like a purposeful, like hybrid strategy of electoral and policy work, we have not been able to really base build. We haven't been able to build a mass of constituencies of our base to create a base that can be mobilized, and that is in alignment with our values, with our ideology, and who can be activated and mobilized to act. And so for this experiment, we decided to use political education as a way to bring together electoral work with our power building components, which is, you know, building leadership, well, leadership development, base building. And another thing that we do to build power is we focus on shifting narrative, or shifting mainstream culture and narrative. So our experiment, is to see if we can do more intentional political education to as a way to integrate electoral and policy work. And we actually, I guess we kind of like unintentionally like piloted it last year during the midterm elections in October, October through November. We did like really heavy political education at the doors in our field work for the November elections, and it had a great impact. It meant that we were at the doors for a longer time. It was about a 20-minute conversation at the doors, canvassing, but it was all focused on educating folks on our issues around police violence, and how like private prisons and the police union here in Phoenix influence and endorse candidates, and those candidates are then gonna be on the side of police, and police is not on the side of us last year. And so we did a lot of political education around like Phoenix PD being the most violent police force in the whole nation, around like the shootings and the deaths and the police brutality and the lack of accountability and transparency. So we did a lot of heavy political education too at the doors with voters, and we ended up seeing an impact in how voters voted at the polls, with one of the primary candidates who was being endorsed by private prisons and the police union losing by like a huge margin. So that was a really good indicator and a good sign for us that, okay, this could potentially work if we do an intentional political education campaign that coincides with electoral and policy work. On the electoral side, we have just decided what elections we're going to be directly involved in for next year. So we still need to flesh that out, what like political education is going to be, but we're going to do like a fuck plea campaign, political education campaign. We're going to do like a fuck police unions. It seems like the energy is to like, you know, be a little bit more, I guess, confrontational and aggressive toward that. But we still need to flesh that out, what that actually, like what the message is going to be with voters and non-voters also, you know, who can influence voters. On the policy side, we're still deciding what work we're going to be doing on the policy side. This year we engaged in the budget, in the City of Phoenix budget, and budget's more regulatory stuff, but it has policy implications, obviously. So we did a lot of political education with Phoenix residents, informing them how the budget process works, how they can be involved. And it was always coming back to that message of we need to divest from police and invest in community resources, and meeting people where they're at, because a lot of folks in our community believe, or when they think of police, they think of safety, right? Or because that's what the dominant culture tells us, right? That's what mainstream culture tells us, is that police is safety, and it's the only option that we have to be safe. So doing a lot of having a lot of conversations around like, actually, no, that's not true. Police don't make us safe, and they actually don't solve the problems in our community. They don't fix roads. They don't provide mental health services. They don't solve poverty. They don't provide housing, right? All of those things, all of those issues that our community actually needs, and that the city is not funding, the police does not solve. So we've already started, we started doing a lot of political education around the budget, and we plan to continue engage in the budget again council just got back in session, so we're going to start that up again. But that's basically the essence of our experiment, is if we can use political education as a way to integrate policy and electoral work to build a base that will, of voters and non-voters, right, that can act, that can be mobilized and act in alignment with our values and our issues.
Thanks, Isabel. Questions for Isabel for that experiment?
Isabel, I have just a quick question. I know that y'all have been doing the work around the budget. Is there someone in council that y'all, like an ally inside of, or rather in council, that has been helpful? Because I know that y'all were doing a lot of research just like amongst staff and amongst your base and stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, we do have a strong ally now. So the council, the Phoenix City Council has, like, the makeup of it has changed a lot over the summer. We now have an ally from movement, Carlos Garcia. He won in District 8, which and so, but he's fairly new, right? So right now, in terms of the budget process, I guess we'll see what this upcoming year will look like in terms of allyship and support from council in the budget process. I think this last cycle, what we found was most helpful is actually speaking directly with budget staff. So, like, for example, we have a pretty good relationship with the head of the budget office in the city. We're in pretty constant contact with him, at least throughout the budget campaign we were. And they know us, and the biggest fear for the city was that we were gonna, like, completely interrupt the budget process and, like, stop them from voting on the budget, which they were very, very afraid of, because then funders and banks get really upset about that. So we'll see what this next budget process looks like. And if we can really, if we can get to 5 votes, right? Because it's a 9-seat council, and we need 5 votes on our side. So that's going to be a lot of the work to see if we can organize city council, those 5 votes.
Could you speak to, Isabel, the specific role of your youth members in this kind of broader community political education experiment? Yeah, so our youth, our 2 programs, we have our youth program, which we just now decided that is going to be 14 to 35. So we've combined our community college program with our high school program, and it's all just now youth, high school to college age. And so with our youth, especially the high school students and those who are not of age to vote, they're the ones who have the most energy to go and register people to vote and get out the vote, because they can't vote. And along, with our parent program, which is largely undocumented moms, the same thing, right? Because they can't vote, there's a big motivation to encourage other people to vote, and we really believe in that, and how non-voters can still influence and impact the electorate, right, and impact the electoral cycle. So on the youth side, it's going to be a lot of leadership development. We have a lot of new students that this year the youth program just had their first team meeting last week, and they had about 13 students that came in, and a lot of them were new students. So that's very exciting. So it's going to be a lot of leadership development and a lot of how can we get students ready for 2020 to engage in campaign work, in field work, and take up leadership positions. We have time for maybe one more quick one. We got about a minute left for the questions portion.
I'm curious about, you talked about like engaging in this policy campaign, but also doing political education. So I'm curious of like what success looks like for you. Is it more around the political education of your members, or is it more focused on this specific campaign?
Yeah, so for us, what's most important at the end of any campaign is were we able to develop leaders through this campaign? Were we able to build our base? And were we able to shift narrative? Were we able to shift the way that folks think about a certain issue, the way that folks talk about a certain issue? So those are the three successes for us, or like, I guess, markers of successes for us, aside from whether or not we won the election, or whether or not we passed the policy or defeated a policy, whatever the campaign looks like. And right now we're still, regarding our leadership development, we have a pretty good, right now I would say, draft of what our leadership development or like ladder of engagement and development looks like right now for building our team and building leaders. We're still trying to figure out what our metrics are for base building, because we have metrics around team structure, like how many contacts or members, volunteers do you need to build within a team. But base building is still a pretty new concept for our organizers and our leads, so we're still fleshing that out, like what is a metric for a base. And for shifting narrative as well, we're still fleshing that out, what that means. Right now, what it's been looking like, mostly it's been the way that media reports on police violence in Phoenix. We've seen a big shift because of our work on how media talks about victims of police violence, how they talk about police and officers. So, that we didn't really like put that at the beginning as a marker of success, but we're still kind of fleshing those two things out, base building and shift in narrative.
Can I just ask, just to clarify, the base that you're trying to build, you're thinking in terms of a broader community base and like a base of voters, right? As opposed to like a base that's anchored by high schools or community colleges or something.
Right, yeah. Our base, we're pretty hyper local. We organize primarily in West Phoenix, so and we're starting to branch out to other areas of Phoenix, but due to capacity right now, our base is anchored more in the broader West Phoenix community.
Cool. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you.
Lucila, you're up.
All right. So apologies if I might seem all over the place for the presentation. We've been getting a lot of feedback from staff, and so I feel like our experiments like shaping up as we're getting a lot of feedback from the different staff that we're working with. But the primary thing that we want to do is we want to test a distributive leadership model in our organizing at the chapter level to see if we can develop in the long-term self-sustaining chapters, right? So kind of like James, what you talked about at the beginning of your presentation, our staff has also been primarily driving most of the work. And so we're trying to move away from staff owning and holding most of the relationships and the work that goes into the chapters, and to having that be owned and developed by the youth themselves. So for the past couple of years, and we're going into the third year of changing the way that we have also been organizing. Our current campaign is about relationship-centered schools, so building more relationships to transform the way that the young people's experiences on campus. That means that our campaign has been very internal focused. We have been working on developing the capacity of staff at the site level, working to change hearts and minds about what the perceptions of people of color, young people of color are with school administration, And so a lot of our focus has been on deep leadership development, and we've kind of like lost track of the larger social power building. And so that's what we're trying to get to. How do we get to like broader numbers? By testing out the distributed leadership model. And the big shift that we made recently is that our focus actually, instead of being focused on the electoral campaigns that we have, is going to be focused on our Relationship Center Schools campaign. So what we're going to do is we're probably working to develop committees in each of the chapters. And those committees will probably be the chapter president, who's like traditionally been the intern that gets compensated for working directly with the organizer. And then that chapter intern then holding the relationships and supporting the officers in each of the chapters to be able to lead that work. Right, so that's what we're trying to test out first, is like, how do we build the infrastructure to support that chapter intern? To do that, and then like what are the infrastructure pieces that we need to develop for the officers too in order to develop that. And the end goal is that the president and the chapters are leading an engagement with young people on campus to decide on a campaign action that they want to hold in there. So for example, in the region that I work with is in Fresno, we're thinking about, you know, everything in the school. Joy has been taken out of the school system, right? Like our young people are just criminalized going to school. They're not humanized, you know, their dignity has been taken away. So like, what would it look like for young people to drive a joy, like driven action on campus that builds relationships between adults and young people on that campus? So we talked anything from a coffee, inviting like staff members, they just sit across from me or like next to me and have coffee with me as like a one-on-one person rather than like a teacher to a student, right? To like actually building arts and creativity, right? So like we're trying to hold back on actually like putting out what kind of actions we want to have to give that space for that committee. So the chapter president and the officers to be the ones who will be driving that strategy and creating what action, the type of action that will work for that campus. So that's mostly our experiment, and most of the work that we're doing and we have been doing over the past couple of months, I've been on like getting people or staff to come along, right? So because a lot of the staff members that we have hired are like this is their first organizing position that they have, so they don't necessarily have the experience of doing external organizing, and they have been like solely focusing on leadership development, right? So it has been a lot about doing reflections, doing trainings and workshops within our staff to understand the power, you know, needs of like how do we build power in the larger level. Rather than just leadership development. And so then like we feel like we have done like a good job of like bringing staff along and understanding the why. Now it's about setting them up to build that infrastructure to be able to support the young people throughout the year, to be able to be more owners and leaders in the chapter work.
Thank you, Lucila. Questions for Lucila?
For young people, just for clarification, is it high schoolers, college students, or both?
Yeah, it's a high school students. We have the chapters in high schools, and it's anywhere between 2 to like 4 chapters that we have in each of the cities that we have a chapter on.
And just to follow up to that, in the high school, how is like administration or teacher, or how does administration see you? How do teachers see you in navigating that dynamic?
Yeah, it depends for each chapter. For the most part, they're scared of young people and political young people, right? It's like majority of staff members are white people, so you know, scared of like, you know, what is a rebel young people like of color can do to the school. But it's been a painful process, and that's the campaign that we have been engaged on talking to them, right? Like trying to, okay, let's think about the biases that we carry, you know, like walk along with them. That's That's been the work that we have been doing for the past 2 years, and it's gotten us some gains, at some point. But we realized that in order to build a larger transformation, we need to build the larger power of the young. Like, we just need to build more with young people. So that they can then push, because like a lot of the anime stuff, they're just not going to be open to. Like we've been painfully in this process, and we gotten staff to come along a long way. But like at the end of the day, even if they do value student voice, a lot of the to them the definition of student voice is really tokenizing, right? And so we've like as an organization decided that we need to have both strategies at the same time, right? Like the internal and the capacity building for those who are already along. But we understand that at some level, they're never going to grow their understanding of what, they're always going to be scared because like the capitalist society that we work around is just power hoarding. And we just need to push them on the other side too. And that's why we're building with young people.
You said, Lucila, the kind of primary vehicle that you want to drive this distributed leadership, like infrastructure, is the relationship-centered schools campaign work. Is that campaign, how does that campaign exist in terms of like demand, policy, target? Are those like individual school level campaigns? Are they city campaigns? Is it statewide? Like, where does the actual like victory in terms of like concrete things happen?
It's like a long haul, right? Because our campaign, it's not the traditional policy campaign where you just get something in writing and you're done, or you get one thing and you're done. It's about the school transformation, right? And so we don't, specifically in that sense, we don't have the traditional, this is the policy that we need to gain, right? Or this is what it looks like. What it would look like is for young people to have more positive experiences in their campus, right? So our campaign, it's a statewide campaign that we're driving, but it's primarily being held at the site level. So in each of the school sites, and we're being flexible because each of the school sites are in different levels too. So there's some school sites that have for years have been working on restorative justice as a practice with staff and students, and so they're far more along than a school that hasn't been introduced to that, for example. So we're trying to go in and meet the schools where they are at, because we have been internally focused, right? Like our campaign has been focused on capacity building with staff. So it has been, we go in and we work with you where you're at, and then try to build in little actions that can be transformative over time, right? So some of those have been there's advisory period where they have 20 to 30 minutes where those 20 to 30 minutes are just teachers and students in there. And the purpose of those minutes are to build relationships, right? There's no instruction, there's nothing that you have to do this for the teacher side. So we have been working on those to be co-anchored by students and staff. So that's an example of the things that we have been doing in each of the school sites to transform the school itself. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Can I check for clarity? So kind of how I heard that is relationship-centered schools is really, it's like a framework that you push statewide. And then how that actually lands is kind of based on the individual locations. And it's kind of building level practices that you try to get implemented to give students greater agency and ownership and processes that build stronger relationships between adults and young people within the school building.
Right, that's correct. And the end goal is for students of color to be humanized and dignified fully in the school sites, right? To be seen more beyond their stereotypes that hold with them.
We got about 2 minutes if there are other questions. I'm curious, could you say what a what the vision is for a successful chapter committee. Like what's the president and the officers kind of doing on the day-to-day, week to week, and what's the relationship to the broader student body within the school?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and that's the most exciting piece of the work for me. And so, ideally, what it would look like is for this chapter president to have a set calendar for the school year, right? Like these are some of the main milestones that I want to reach in this quarter. Like it could be as open as that, but it's like the president driving that, right? And then the president holding meetings with their officers to design what that agenda would look like, what the division and role would be, right? So like everybody's participating in the base building, the recruitment, the leadership development, the relationship holding and stuff like that. So that's ideally what it would look like. And then they take turns facilitating the chapter meetings too. So then over time, the role of the organizer gets diminished as well, right? So like then over time, they'll be able to hold their own chapter without needing the organizer to be present at all.
And do you have an idea of like what kinds of activities the chapter may do to engage the whole student body? So if the chapter is, let's say, like 5 to 15 students, and you're trying to build a student power to win these different practices at the building level, like how are they engaging that broader constituency of students?
Yeah, so we're talking about it in terms of the campaign right now. For example, it would be maybe like an idea would be a survey collection, right? So like then the president and the officers, get together and brainstorm a menu of options, right? Like these are some of the core activities that we're thinking would have the impact that we're looking for at the campus. And then they will develop a survey, and everybody in the chapter would then support to develop that survey and give it out at school. Another thing that they have been working on as well is like storytelling, right? How do we collect data that's more qualitative measures, right? So like how do we bring a broader student body to tell us the stories of the experiences that they have on campus? So again, it would be like young people holding focus groups, with the rest of their peers, or like presentations or surveys, data collection. So I think primarily right now would be through data collection to get to the action. And then once we have the action, it would be to actually like be included in the action, to turn out, to participate in those things.
Great, thank you. So I have to check in and see what happened with YUC. But since we don't have a fifth group, that gives us a little bit of kind of open discussion time before we need to start moving to the wrap up stuff. I do want to give an update before we get to that on the coach for this Praxis circle. So I recruited and was able to secure Luis Sanchez, who is the co-founder of Power California. Luis comes out of inner city struggle and was running Mobilize the Immigrant Vote / Y Vote that merged and became Power California. And I reached out to the conversation that I had Luis, why I thought he would be a good fit for this particular group is because he has a lot of experience both with working with high school age young people and thinking about how the role of youth organizing in an intergenerational context. And obviously with Power California is thinking a lot about the role of young people in moving electoral strategies towards building that kind of power and thinking about voter organizing and the leadership pipeline, the leadership ladder to try to grow our organizations and is doing that across the state. I think Californians for Justice, y'all are part of Power California. So I'm really excited that he said yes, and it's an interesting setup because the proposal that he made was that it wouldn't be just him, so he'll be the primary point person for this Praxis group. But we're going to be contracting directly with Power California, which means that at different points, if he has other staff members and members of his team that have particular kinds of expertise that are relevant to the conversations y'all are having, that he can tap them to bring them in to provide additional kinds of support. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm excited about it. So he should be joining beginning in the next Praxis Circle meeting in September. Are there any questions about that? Thoughts? And then I imagine in the next couple of weeks, well, I'll tell him that he should start reaching out to y'all individually to start setting up one-on-ones, because that's part of the structure. In addition to these meetings is the one-on-one meetings. So one thought that's coming up for me, just thinking about this group and hearing a little bit more detail about the experiments and thinking about, again, how to make this space most useful. I think there's this central question that all of y'all are grappling with, which is like, what does it take to develop high school age young people? Like, what are the core competencies that we really want to prioritize? And how much time does that take, to your point, Maxima? And what is a reasonable expectation of how much we can develop them in the limited time that we have them in our organizations, is the point that James is always bringing up. So my sense is that's probably a really good place to start in terms of your collective conversation, and obviously kind of bringing in the things you're trying to test in your experiment. And I can talk to Luis about how to best frame that kind of conversation, but I want to hear what you all think in terms of like the best use of this 90-minute block and how to kind of get that discussion going. That is kind of like the first topic that you really hone in on, and maybe think through what are the finer points of that question and what are the different lessons you're drawing from your previous experiences and how that's informing your experiments. So I want to offer that as a proposal and see what people think.
Sorry, can I ask for, like, sorry if I missed the information, in the past, but when you're talking about the 90-minute block, you mean these meetings moving forward?
That's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
And then, like, just a general question, can you give us a little bit more, of what the role of the consultant, like, I don't know what to ask for example. So, like, can you give us a little bit more, like, how many hours do they have with each organization, what they can offer and stuff?
Yeah. So the idea behind having these coaches working with the Praxis circles is just to provide an extra element of support and another kind of a seasoned organizer to bounce ideas off of. Because I think oftentimes it's useful to have someone kind of be in these strategic questions with you that's outside of your organization and can offer a different kind of perspective. So really the coaches are there to ask, like whatever you need of them. And it's going to kind of be up to you and the coach to figure that out. But you should think of them as like another resource as you're thinking through the different elements of your experiment and the things that you're testing. And so Luis will be in these monthly meetings that you'll be having, and he'll be playing a facilitative role. So he'll be facilitating these moving forward. And then we'll also meet with each organization one-on-one on a monthly basis in between those meetings. And those one-on-ones will be up to an hour long, depending on what you need in any given month. And then the other thing to remember is that Luis will be meeting with myself and the other coach, Nijmi, on a monthly basis as well, to kind of, so that we can collectively check in on what are the different things that are coming up with our groups and where there might be kind of common things. Like tackling common agenda items and that sort of thing that are showing up across the Pipelines to Power cohort and tying them back together to the kind of major lessons and themes that we've been focusing on within the entire cohort. Just real quick, does that sound right as far as kind of the kickoff conversation for this Praxis circle, the kind of a deeper dive into what does it take to develop high school age young people and what are the specific challenges that arise with that? Focusing on that first. Yes? All right, cool. All right, good. I'm gonna stop recording because we're gonna start moving to next steps and whatnot.